Excel Tutorial 5, pages 301 through 306. All right, I want you to start on page 300 and read about pivot tables. It's really important that you understand what one is and how we use it, okay? Seriously, go read that. Then on page 301, to create a pivot table using the January data table. All right, so if you took a break, make sure that you're back in this correct file and you are clicked onto cash receipts and within your nice little data table here, okay? All right, are you ready? Step number 2, on the ribbon, click the Insert tab. In the Tables group, right over here, click the Pivot Tables button. The Create Pivot Table dialog box opens. Look at figure 5-32 on page 302. Okay, here's our pivot table dialog box. Again, always dockable, just move it wherever you want. So you can see that the selection has gone all the way around the data in this table. Step number 4, make sure the Select a Table or Range option button is selected. Okay, select a table or range right there. And you want to make sure that the name of this table appears right here. Our table or range name is January data. Click the New Worksheet button if necessary. Right here it says choose where you want the pivot table report to be placed. New Worksheet. That's correct. Make sure you have that radio button turned on. And then step number 6, click OK. A new worksheet named Sheet 1, see it right there, is inserted to the left of the cash receipts worksheet, on the left of the empty pivot table report area where the finished pivot table will be placed. On the right is the pivot table field names pane over here. Okay, that's what you're going to use to build your pivot table. The pivot table tools tab appears as a contextual tab on your ribbon. See it right there? All right, so pretty weird looking so far, but that's okay. You're doing it right. Just if you've got it looking like this, look at figure 5-33. Okay, there is a little thing about, trouble if you have problems and what to do. So take a look at 5-33 and look at the names of everything. This is our pivot table report area. We have not built anything yet, so it's just kind of ugly and looking at us. We have our pivot table fields pane right here. We have our fields columns right here. And then down here we have 4 areas that represent the pivot table layout. Okay? Okay, now this one, you know what? Make sure you're reading your textbook because this one does get a little bit tricky. So read page 303. Read all of that so you understand about adding fields to a pivot table, because right now obviously we've got nothing, it's blank, and we're going to have to add things. All right, on the bottom of page 303, to add fields to the pivot table, in the pivot table fields name pane, drag week number from the upper section to the rows area in the lower section. Okay, so we're going to drag week number from the upper section to the rows area of the lower section. Okay, here's our rows area, so figure out where you're going. Now all you're going to do is you're literally going to get on top of this. You see I have that 4-headed arrow? Hold down your left mouse button and drag it down, and when you get to the rows section, you see I have that green bar? Let go. Did you see what happened over here? Okay, so this is how we build the pivot table. All right, the week number field appears in the rows area, and the unique values in the week number field 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 appear in the pivot table report area. There, see figure 5-35 on page 304 and make sure that your screen looks like that screen. There's also a little trouble box just in case you had an issue. And the reason you read that trouble box, again, is so that if later when you're doing it on your own, if you make a mistake, you have read about the possibilities of what could happen and how to fix it. All right, step number 2. In the pivot table fields pane, click the amount checkbox. Okay, so right here, just click on the amounts checkbox. The sum of amounts button is placed in the values box because the field contains numeric values. Okay, so when we clicked on this, it automatically popped into our values area. Okay, now take a look over here and you can see it popped in over here too. The pivot table groups the items from the January data table by week number and calculates the total amount for each week. The grand total appears at the bottom of the pivot table. Compare your screen to figure 5-36. Okay, which is kind of right here in the middle of the page. And I'm checking my numbers too, just to make sure I did everything right. All right, next you'll add the transaction date and the segment fields to the pivot table. In the pivot table fields name pane, click the transaction date checkbox. Okay, transaction date, just click its checkbox. The transaction date field appears in the rows area box below the week number field, and the unique items in the transaction date field are indented below each week number field item in the pivot table report. Okay, so when we clicked on transaction date, okay, it came down here, right? And it popped into our rows group, and look over here and you can clearly see where the information has been placed into our pivot table report area, right? Okay, on page 305. Step number 4. In the pivot table fields pane, click the segment checkbox. The segment field appears in the rows area below the transaction date field, right there. And its unique items are indented below the week number and transaction date fields already in our pivot table. Okay, right over here. Do you see it? Okay, so segment means like coffee, food, gifts, and specialty drink, which is why it's really important that you always read what's going on in these tutorials so that you understand you're not just poking buttons. So when we told it to place our segments into the pivot table report, there it went. Okay, those are our segments. All right, take a look at figure 5-37 and ensure that your screen looks like their check figure. Okay, we have that much. So let's go on to changing the layout of our pivot table. Guys, these pivot tables are a little bit tricky, so make sure that you read this portion of your textbook. Do not just skip over it and keep going and poking buttons. All right, once you've read it, go to page 306 to move the segment field to the columns area. In the pivot table fields pane, okay, first things first, do you know where your pivot table fields pane is located? Okay, that's over here, right? Locate the segment field button in the rows area. Okay, there's our rows area. Here's our segment field button. Drag the segment field button from the rows area to the columns area. Okay, so we're going to get on top of it and get that 4-pronged arrow, right? Then we're just going to hold down our left mouse button and drag and pull it up into the columns section, and then let go of your mouse button. Okay, now did you see the tremendous change over here? And now each segment, right, is now a column as opposed to a row where it was before. There, now your pivot table is arranged the way that Lori wants it. Go ahead and hit save, and then we're going to go on to our next video.